So Fallout 76 is a game that came out and, to put it mildly, disappointed a whole bunch of people. I am not one of those people, precisely because I love Bethesda games. Some of them are among my favorite gaming experiences of all time. However, loving something usually comes with getting to know it, and in my case, I feel like I know this man. I've heard him say the things and talk the talk. I've seen the Fleetwood Mac video. And just like I didn't play Fallout 3 on release, nor Skyrim or Fallout 4, then I also held off with 76. 5 years and many updates later, I decided to give it a go from an objective point of view. Try to give it a clean slate with few expectations from my part, and the results might surprise you. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know I like my stuff segmented into clearly distinguishable parts. As such, I will be separately discussing the following things I've experienced across some 80 hours of playtime. The current state of Fallout 76 and whether or not it looks more like a finished product than it did at launch. Things that I think are wrong, not from a technical point of view but rather the core design of the game itself. And finally, things that are genuinely good and I enjoyed. If all that sounds mildly interesting, stick around to find out just how bad Fallout 76 really is. If someone were to ask me about the current state of Fallout 76 as of the first half of 2023, my answer would be an absolute and resounding, it's fine. Fine meaning the game has a couple of substantial issues that are somewhat easy to ignore depending on how much you end up enjoying its gameplay loop. A couple of important things I think are worth mentioning when discussing the current state of a Bethesda game. I had only 2 crashes and absolutely 0 progress breaking bugs. Quest progression was at all times buttery smooth, and it only took me a bit to get used to the checkpoint system since obviously you can't save or load your game. So whatever else I might say from here on out, at least in regards to crashes and progress, the game is pretty stable. With that said, let's talk about graphics. You probably heard the phrase 16 times the detail, which has now become one of Todd Howard's most famous quotes of dubious veracity, allegedly referring to the fact that despite the reuse of many of Fallout 4's assets, and I really do mean many, Fallout 76 has much more detail in its presentation. Funny as it ended up being, the statement is not entirely false. I don't know about 16 times, but having played both games side by side for a while, I can definitely say that Fallout 76 looks better. Specifically when talking about things like the open world clutter and draw distances. YouTuber Tonic has a pretty cool video making some direct comparisons if you want to know more. Fallout 76, however, is a bit of a mess visually. As good as the draw distance is, for example, it has a tendency to bug out and make things pop out of nowhere. This is particularly egregious when talking about foliage. An object is also not safe from popping just because it's loaded in, as there were many occasions where things failed to render, and not just from afar like they're meant to, but at distances where it's clear something's wrong. There was also a visual bug that happened occasionally where things get weirdly smeared and overlaid on top of each other. It's pretty trippy, I hated it. Going back to the discussion of graphical quality for a moment, I would have you know that I genuinely do not care about all that. I personally find things like the world building and the style of the visuals to be much more important than whether or not the game has 16 times the detail. I do have to say, however, that my opinion on Fallout 76's presentation is basically the same I had when Fallout 4 came out. I do not find the visuals very appealing. In fact, I would say that these are fairly ugly games. 76 does have an edge with its lighting, which is much better and can make for very pleasant looking scenarios, particularly when exploring forested areas. This is of course my own personal opinion. I'm not knowledgeable enough about these things to specifically point out what's wrong with this game visually apart from the aforementioned glitches. They just not do it for me. Now let's talk about jank. Fallout 76 is a very janky game. This should come as no surprise as this is the case with all Bethesda games, up to a point where I would argue that it's part of the charm. I'm probably in the minority here, but I personally love me some occasional bugs and glitches. They are often funny, not game breaking, and provide some insight into game development. However, even if I do tolerate and even enjoy these things, most people don't. And to those people I would say, be aware that this game is the polar opposite of smooth sailing. When it isn't any of the graphical issues I just mentioned, it's the NPCs that have a tendency to bug out, particularly your enemies. During your travels across the Appalachian Mountains, you will find a plethora of AI issues, pathfinding problems, broken spawn points, and just general deranged behavior and strange happenings when interacting with the many creatures that inhabit this world. And even if I am always more amused and entertained by these things than anything else, anyone with even a passing interest in this game should be well aware that these things happen constantly. I can very confidently say that I did not have a single gameplay session without seeing some outlandish stuff. Stealth also doesn't work properly half the time and only serves to further compound any issues with enemy behavior. Strange things like enemies not noticing you when they should, stealth bonus damage being applied even when clearly discovered, and more bizarrely, enemies forgetting about you in the middle of a firefight simply because you crouched and entered stealth mode. Now, if you'll excuse me, we need to stop covering the current state of Fallout 76 for a moment and jump into its design issues, because I honestly believe that this is an area in which the two sections bleed into each other a bit. Let me explain. I make a special distinction between a game's current state and its design issues because I think it's worth separating the problems I encounter when playing. A game can be bad because it's unpolished and rushed, and it can also be bad because the developer or publisher missed the mark and made the wrong decisions along the way. These two things are sadly not mutually exclusive either. All of this just to say that you might feel like the things I just mentioned and the ones I'll be covering in a minute are technically bugs or glitches, but I would argue that they actually stem from Fallout 76's most defining feature, its nature as an online-only experience. In other words, unlike bugs and glitches, I don't think these are going away anytime soon. It's a little hard to tell when dealing with jank in an online game if it's an issue with the game, your connection, or a server-side issue. I can't explain it very well just by showing it to you, but they somehow feel different when playing. I'll show you a few examples and tell you my gut feeling, let's see if you agree. Enemies getting stuck in terrain feels like a game issue. Enemies teleporting behind you, online issue. Enemies with broken behavior, game issue. Dead enemies respawning on top of you, online issue.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Game showing other players as unresponsive, bugged out naked people, online issue. The game not detecting the usage of consumables and not applying their effect, online issue, and this one really pisses me off. You don't get a lag refund on your consumables. Further evidence of lag and server problems are the few interactions we can directly compare with Fallout 4. Mole rats, for example, work the same way in both games, and in both games they have an attack where they burrow into the ground and bite you in the ass from below. In Fallout 76, this attack never looks as intended. Up until now, I can honestly tell you I don't mind these things. I'll get into why a bit later when I talk about the things I like about these games, but these technical problems were not enough to get me to stop playing. There is, however, one that almost did: the stuttering. Every once in a while, an entire session would be plagued by these stutters and freezes that made the game truly unplayable. This didn't happen often enough to entirely discourage me from playing, but when it did, it was truly infuriating and would always make me quit for the day. It's the fact that these virtual seizures always seem to be worse when doing things with other players that leads me to believe that these are connection issues I was having. There didn't seem to be anything in particular that triggered them aside from that. I tried fast traveling to other locations and logging out and back into the game, as well as the usual trademark PC gaming troubleshooting solutions, all this to no avail. Again, these are just my best guesses, but it's pretty clear to me that this game's problems are not just due to lack of polish. And the big issue with the online aspect not working properly is that this will always be an online experience. And if in 5 years and many updates later these things are still like this, well, this is just what the game is like, unfortunately. Now you might be thinking, how do I know that these are not problems on my end? Well, I don't know for certain, but what I do know is that 1. My computer is pretty good and connected to the net with the cable as the laws of gaming dictate. 2. I have a pretty high and consistent internet speed, and 3. I am the only creature in my household that regularly uses it. I think it's safe to say that I've done my part, so to speak. Let's move away from the technical stuff for a bit and get into Fallout 76's gameplay elements and how they don't really mesh well together with its quasi-MMO nature. I want to start this bit here by explaining why, in my honest opinion, Bethesda makes the best open worlds. Not open world games, mind you, but the worlds themselves are always my favorites to explore. Satisfaction from exploring open world games can be derived from a variety of elements. Things like the combat, visual design, the design of the world itself, or simply by having exploration be rewarding. These games in particular feel so good to play because no matter where you go, none of it feels like a waste. There is some sort of reward for your time in every location. Because of the way these games work, your character's progression is almost always positively affected by simply wandering around. Meaning that even the most boring cave or dungeon will have enemies to fight and loot to take. No matter what, you always feel like you're advancing. But the thing doesn't stop there, as most locations in a Bethesda game have some narrative context within. Yeah, there's a meme of the environmental storytelling skeleton, but if you play these games, you know that's not the only thing they use. What I'm trying to say here is that the gameplay is always pushing you to explore and improve your character, and once you do, you're always rewarded with at least an honest attempt at making the world feel like a real place that's lived in. And that's something that I always really enjoy, and that's something that Fallout 76 does great. For a while. This game, being a live service venture, takes a cue from similar MMO RPG hybrid thingies like Destiny, The Division, Outriders, you know the deal. There is an endgame to Fallout 76, and that is leveling up, collecting cards to make powerful builds, and grinding public events in hopes that you get legendary items with perk rolls that synergize with said builds. Now, I have no problem with grinding in games. In fact, I quite like me a good grind. The problem here is the way the game goes about pushing you into this part of the gameplay. As the game starts, in typical RPG fashion, your character is weak, but so are your enemies. Most foes you encounter die in a few shots of a trusty 10mm pistol. However, things soon begin to ramp up. And while this is also typical of RPGs, unlike something like Fallout 4 for example, just leveling up and finding better gear doesn't quite cut it in 76. Enemies turn very tanky and spawn more elite variants, up to a point where going out to explore becomes detrimental to your inventory. And regular guns start becoming unviable to deal the damage you need. Not only that, but you start incurring attrition in the form of damaged armor and weapons, and your depleting stock of aid items and ammunition. It becomes essential to have the right perk cards and legendary items, both to ease the effects of this attrition and also to do the required damage to deal with threats efficiently. Once you do plan out a build and get to min-maxing and synergizing, exploration becomes once again affordable, so to speak. On paper, this is not terrible. I just described the endgame of most of these games, right? People don't just roam around patrol zones in Destiny, they do so because there is an event, or a seasonal quest, or they just fuck off to do a nightfall or whatever. I retired from Destiny, I have no idea what's going on. Anyway, the problem here, as you have probably noticed if you have eyes, Fallout 76 is built with the skeleton of Fallout 4, and with the nervous system, and the muscles. This creates a very contradictory gameplay loop where the best part of the game, to explore the open world, to see cool stuff and get more powerful, becomes strangely prohibitive the more you partake in it, until you do the aforementioned grinding. It's a really strange thing, it's like it creeps up on you, like the game starts truly very solid and enjoyable. I'll get to it in the next section, but most of Fallout 76 is honestly better than 4, up until this happens. The design of the open world is pretty good, but not thought out for these MMO mechanics. For example, I mentioned the Destiny patrol zones before. These areas are filled with enemies, but usually very weak ones. Most of them can be one-shotted, and even if you don't feel like doing that, you can just hop on your Sparrow and leave, cause like I said, roaming the patrol zones is not really Destiny's main appeal. Since Fallout 76's open world is a Bethesda-style open world, if you are over level 50, everyone and everything everywhere is over level 50. And the problem here is that you want to go everywhere and see everything. So you can find a random hut in the middle of nowhere, approach it cause you're curious, find a Mirelurk King or whatever that takes 100 buckshots from a fully upgraded explosive shotgun to go down, and when you're done, here's your reward. Some meat. It's not worth it at all. Even when you do plan out a nice build and get some good rolls on some legendary weapons, the reward is only a little XP and whatever narrative bit you find, if any. Loot and gear stops being something you find and becomes something to grind, which I feel goes against one of the pillars of enjoyment in these games. Also, if you're one of these completionists who enjoys clearing areas of the map, well, there is no clearing anything in this game, or at least the game will never tell you like it used to for some reason. You better have a good memory of everywhere you've been. And to this, we have to add the parts of Fallout 76 that have been purposefully nerfed by Bethesda, the crafting and carrying weight. Both of these things work almost exactly the same as in Fallout 4. However, certain seemingly unnecessary limits have been applied by the developer. And as you can probably imagine, it is incredibly easy to connect the dots and reveal the usual nefarious AAA shenanigans at work. Carry weight, for example, started as a base 200 in Fallout 4, after which you got 10 more per point of strength. In Fallout 76, the starting amount has been reduced to 150 and only 5 per strength level. Then there's the strong back perk. In Fallout 4, fully leveling up this perk granted you 50 extra carry capacity and severely reduced the penalties of being over-encumbered. In 76, however, 40 extra weight is the most you get at max level. Something similar happens with the Lone Wanderer perk, which reduces damage taken and increases action points in 76, while giving you a whopping 100 extra capacity in Fallout 4 as well as the aforementioned buffs. But the biggest kick in the head by far is the stash limit. 1200 is the weight limit of all the stuff you can acquire in Fallout 76. Mind you, this includes any and all crafting materials you may wish to stockpile. This number is also Bethesda being benevolent and giving into the demands of the player. On release, the game had a hilarious limit of 400 for your stash. In Fallout 4, your stash has unlimited capacity. And you may wonder, can you get unlimited capacity in 76? Well, yes you can with Fallout First. Fallout First is a subscription service for Fallout 76 that gives you an assortment of perks and goodies, chief of which, and relevant to our conversation, a stash with infinite capacity. You know, like the one in Fallout 4. Now listen, you might be thinking that I'm getting a little tinfoil hatty on you, but to me the parallels with the literal previous game in the franchise cannot be ignored. Those are only the biggest senseless changes, but even certain small things that make no sense, like fast travel costing you bottle caps, moving your camp costing you bottle caps, dismantled weapons no longer adding the mods they had attached for later use. This was such a cool component of the Fallout 4 gameplay loop. Finding a weapon that had a mod that you hadn't crafted yet was exciting. You could then dismantle that weapon and acquire that mod. Then there's the perk card system, which on its own I don't entirely dislike. What I don't like is the fact that they are just another ingredient in the grindy stew that the game is. If you want to unlock every perk card at max level, you are looking at level 543. A bit less in practice since you do get card parks every 5 levels, but still. Then there's legendary slots. You unlock these at certain level thresholds and then you have a bunch of powerful legendary cards can be placed here. These can also be leveled up, but unlike normal cards, these require perk coins. You get 2 perk coins from scrapping duplicate normal cards you may have, and leveling up a legendary costs 50, 100 and 150 coins respectively each level. So let me be clear, you need to have a perk card you don't want, which, assuming you like to have a variety of options for your builds, it will be a duplicate of a card you have already leveled up to its final form. Scrap it and then repeat the process 150 times to get a single max level legendary card. This is a tremendous amount of grind. But my issue is not with the time. If you like to do this, all the more power to you, and I imagine there's grindy things in actual MMOs that make this look like peanuts. But like I said before, there's things that make no sense. In this case, for example, the fact that swapping legendary cards costs you perk coins. Why? What's the reason? There is fundamentally no gameplay reason to do this. I don't know, to me it's pretty clear that this game is very purposefully designed to keep you playing for the longest time possible. Because somewhere, someone did the math and realized that the more time people spend in game, the more likely it is that they spend money in it. This is the bane of many a AAA franchise, from Call of Duty to almost every Ubisoft franchise, and sadly now, Fallout. And 76 has got everything you've come to expect from a game design like this. You have a season pass, an in-game store, login reminders of said store, you have unethical currency bundles, you have predatory bait in the form of free items, you have the option to purchase convenience, a subscription service charging you for things that used to be free. Now all that sounds pretty bad. However, I believe it's worth noting that at the time of writing this section of the script, I have played Fallout 76 for 80 hours and paid less than $10 for it. And some annoying comparisons with the previous game aside, I've had no trouble spending a total of 0 units of currency in its myriad of premium elements. I'll get into this a bit more later when it's time for Veredict, but for now I think it's a pretty good time to move on to the good stuff. First thing I would like to mention here is the Fallout 76 online community, cause these are some pretty cool people. This of course comes a bit with the territory as the game is mostly a cooperative experience and players are encouraged to be nice and help each other.
We rock!
Rock and stone, yeah!
Yeah!
However, I still find it remarkable just how nice these people were. The coolest experience I had by far was meeting a very high level player in the starting area of the game. This person then proceeded to drop a fully upgraded pump action shotgun that basically carried me until level 30 or so. Then another one dropped me a full set of metal armor upgraded to improve your carrying capacity, which like I explained before was an absolute blessing with how the carry weight works in this game. Level 100 and I'm still using that armor, it's great. This happened a second time while I was much lower level with the second character I created. People just seem to enjoy helping each other out. If you guys just happen to be watching this, Jaferno, Oriel and Gladheater, you're a trio of truly wonderful people, thank you very much. I like the shotgun bit so much that I also gave the same gun to a low level player when it started to become a bit underpowered for me. Hopefully this person didn't scrap it and passed it on. Then there's the events, which like most content in a huge online game are a bit of a mixed bag and your mileage will certainly vary. Distilled to their base mechanics, all of them are based around defending something from hordes of enemies. However, just like the myriad of locations in the game, events always have a lot of thematic flavor that helps them stand out on their own. And experiencing some of them for the first time at least felt rewarding on its own beyond any XP or loot I acquired. My favorite one, even after so many hours, is still the nuke. I do not know exactly what launching a nuke entails. All I know is that almost every session there was always a group of very dedicated people that go through probably a lot of trouble to start an event that everyone in the server could enjoy. The first time you hear the announcement for the nuke is actually pretty funny because it's very cool and ominous with the PA system and the alarm going off.
Attention citizens, nuclear strike imminent. Please exit the area at your earliest convenience. Thank you for your cooperation.
But mine and probably every new player's thoughts was, screw that, I want to see. It is also a pretty cool representation of your journey as a character. Probably not being able to get very close to your first nuke event and eventually being right then and there, just outside the blast radius ready to rumble with your fellow survivors. I also engaged a bit in some jolly cooperation with my buddy who we're gonna call Mr. Bear. Mr. Bear is the only person in the world who will semi-consistently play games with me, or at least it was that way when we were a pair of youths. All the positive aspects of the game were unsurprisingly better with a co-op buddy by your side experiencing these things. So if you have people to play with, I'd say you can comfortably multiply any praise I give the game by, let's say, 1.5. For lack of a more appropriate word for a man who is already in his 30s, the vibe of Fallout 76 is pretty cool. The entire theme of the game is this hopeful attempt to rebuild society, and the jolly cooperation you engage in feels more than fitting. Then we have the map. Not the map you use for orientation, which to be fair is also my favorite out of these, but rather the actual massive level the game takes place in. I really like it. I like the variety of locations you can visit. I like that it's divided into very clear zones, each with their own visuals, enemies, risks and rewards. I like that it's a mountain range, so you get a lot more verticality than was available back in Boston, and it also brings up some nice Skyrim memories. I like the quests and random encounters and how stupid they can be. I love that there is a mission that requires you to go to the DMV, and it's basically the worst mission in the game, but like on purpose, so it's funny. And I like the narrative and the characters. You should know that the difference in quality with the main narrative that we got on release compared to what was added later is quite noticeable. Not saying I wasn't entertained by investigating the mystery of the Scorch Plague, but what was added later, particularly in the Wastelanders update, clearly has a bit more thought put into it. And I personally found it way more memorable than finding your son or whatever. There's also a bit of a tonal backlash, I would say. The base narrative of Fallout 76 is pretty gloomy and depressing, while the Wastelanders questline has you assembling a crew and looking for a legendary treasure. Tone differences aside, I would say that the current mood of the content being added to the game fits much better with its nature as an online co-op RPG. Now I stand by what I said. All of these things I just mentioned are, in my honest opinion, better than in Fallout 4. And while it is true that it is a bit of an unfair comparison since 76 is a live service game, and as such it's had content added to it for free for the last 5 years, at the very least there's this consolation prize to the game being the grindy time sink that it is. Appalachia is a pretty cool place to spend time in and explore. It is a bit annoying that at some point you have to pause your exploring to engage in build prep, but once that's out of the way you should have no problem going back to adventuring if you so desire. Also, again, in the spirit of being fair, I have complained that there is a grind in the game and that at times it seems like its existence serves only to push you to spend more money in the game, but at the same time it was fairly entertaining. Like I said, your mileage may vary, but mandatory grinding and repetition aside, my lizard gamer brain was properly stimulated by getting new toys to play around with. So if you're into that, this part of the game will not feel like a chore. As a final thing, I must add that the soundtrack is very good. Einan Zur has been elevating the soundscape of this franchise since 2008 and he once again brought out the big guns for 76, and seemingly continues to do so one expansion at a time. Now that I am done talking about this game, I am sadly surprised at how similarly sounding all of this is. To my previous video, that is. My final thoughts are essentially the same. This game is a huge step in the wrong direction for this franchise and I sincerely hope that this is more of a spin-off thing and not the way Fallout is going to be from now on. And if it is a spin-off, then it makes me sad that they blew it so hard. I feel a similar way with this as I did with Far Cry New Dawn. Being a person that enjoys the Far Cry franchise, the idea of a post-apocalyptic game honestly had me pretty hyped. And it's a shame that they might never revisit the concept again because they messed up and rushed the game with reused assets from the previous game and intrusive RPG elements for no reason. Online Fallout is a thing people have been talking about since before Bethesda took the reins of the franchise, and the concept has lots of potential. A proper live service game in the Fallout universe, built from the ground up to be its own thing and not with scavenged bits and pieces of the previous entry, would have been pretty cool. And it's a shame that 76 is the thing people will associate from now on with the term online Fallout game. At the same time, this doesn't mean that this game doesn't have things to recommend. To summarize a bit, your enjoyment of Fallout 76 will largely depend on your expectations of it. If you expect a game that doesn't exemplify the worst strengths of AAA gaming, a game that respects your time and doesn't have mechanics designed to make you waste it, a game that plays buttery smooth and has no issues whatsoever, a game that isn't composed of 90% reused assets from another game, then you should probably pass. On the other hand, if you expect a ton of places to explore and narratives to experience in the Fallout universe, a huge map that constantly gets new things added to it and it's the best one they have put out since Skyrim, a cool community that is always willing to help and had fun with each other, which I imagine would be exponentially better if, unlike me, you have friends, a gameplay loop that, while somewhat downgraded from previous entries, is still fairly enjoyable, and to get all that and possibly more for the often discounted price of about $10, provided you wait for a sale and do not fall for the alluring store, then you will probably enjoy Fallout 76. Though I personally regret the time spent in Appalachia. No, the overall experience was positive. However, I must be fair and say that I probably never would have played this game if I didn't have this video in mind. By the time I finish and upload this, everyone will most likely be playing Starfield, and then we'll see what lessons Bethesda has learned from Fallout 76, if any. Hopefully it will be the right ones. Thank you very much for watching, consider liking and subscribing for more of these and other stuff. I have to go now. I am currently addicted to Endless Space 2 and wouldn't you know it, between that and playing Fallout 76 I now find myself hyped for Starfield. So the question now is, how important is the birthday gift of a toddler? Will he even remember? Will he believe me when I say we couldn't afford it? Vote now on your phones.